Hi Year 13, so the poem I'm going to have a little look at in this video is called Effects. We have gone through this in lessons. As always, I will go through everything again, and anything that you missed if you weren't in that lesson, you can have a little go at as you watch this video, but hopefully this will help with revision anyway, as we've agreed. Diving straight into the starter then, so as I said, if you were not in, if you just pause and have a little go at writing out the definitions of those following words. So you've got asyndetic listing, you've got enjambment, and you've got caesura. So hopefully you've paused with that. The definitions then are as follows. So you've got asyndetic listing, which is the use of a comma after each item in a list. Enjambment is when a sentence runs over 2 or more lines in a poem, and caesura is a pause in the middle of a line of poetry, commonly caused by a comma or a full stop. However, there could be a hyphen, it could be ellipses, but commonly it's a comma or a full stop. Going on to the poem itself then, so as always I will read through the poem and then I will stop and go back to the beginning and just go through it and make some analytical comments then as we go through. Effects. I held her hand that was always scarred from chopping, slicing, from the knives that lay in wait, in bowls of washing up that was raw, the knuckles reddened, rough from scrubbing hard, at saucepan, frying pan, cup and plate, and giving love the only way she knew, in each cheap cut of meat, in roast and stew, old-fashioned food she cooked and we ate. And I saw that they had taken off her rings, the rings she kept once in her dressing-table drawer, with faded snapshots, long-forgotten things, scent sprays, tortoise-shell combs, a snap or two from the time we took a holiday abroad. But lately had never been without, as if she wanted everyone to know she was his wife, only now that he was dead. And her watch? Classic ladies' model, gold strap. It was gone. And I'd never known her not to have that on. Not in all the years they sat together watching soaps and game shows I'd disdain. Not when my turn came to cook for her, chops or chicken portions, English, bland, familiar flavours she said she preferred to whatever funny foreign stuff young people seem to eat these days. She'd heard not all the weeks I'd come, when she sat night after night and stared unseeing at the television at her inner weather, heaved herself upright, blinked and poured, drink after drink, and gulped and stared. The Scotch, when he was alive, she wouldn't touch. That was her way to be with him again. Not later in the psychiatric ward, where she blinked unseeing at the wall, the nurses who would steal anything, she said, and dreamt of when she was a girl, of the time before I was born, or grew up and learned contempt, while the TV in the corner bled to drown some poor soul's moans and curses, and she took her pills and blinked and stared, as the others shuffled around and drooled and swore. But now she lay here, a thick rubber band, with her name on it in smudged black ink was all she wore. On the hand I held, a blotched and crinkled hand, whose fingers couldn't clasp at mine any more, or falteringly wave or fumble at my sleeve. The last words she had said were, "Please don't leave." But of course I left. Now I was back, though she could not know that, or turn her face to me. First face to see a nurse bring the little bag of effects to me. So there are the questions that we went over in class. So what is the significance of the title of the poem? What is the significance of the use of effects in the final line? Are there any aspects of the poem that may be seen as humorous in tone? How does this make effects more or less effective for the reader? And what's the importance of the single stanza structural technique in this poem? So have a little go at answering those, again just to establish your own critical perspective on the poem, and then we will go through it and I will give you some of the notes that I have made for this poem. Okay, so starting with the title then, again this is another poem that has quite ambiguous title to it, but it does become more apparent as we read the poem, and certainly towards the end then when effects, the true significance of the title is revealed there at the very end, so it's quite cyclical in its approach. It comes back to that first word that we have. So it starts off then, I held her hand, so the hand seems to be quite important here. And we talked about the significance of hands when we were looking at genetics as well, and that idea then that hands are another form of communication, and in this case in particular that idea of showing a bond when it's sort of drawing attention to this part of the line with the alliteration, yeah, I held her hand. So there is an idea of closeness. However, this caesura then gives us an idea of separation, and we focus in onto the hand then of this person who we come to realise as we read through is the poet's mother. Was always scarred, so suggests maybe a tough life, maybe hard work there as well, which is emphasised as we go through this long list of activities that link to his mother's sort of her hands, why they are scarred in this way, why they're quite rough, from chopping, slicing, and from the knives that lay in wait. So we have these actions, these verbs, so again showing maybe that the mother was always on the go, she was always doing things, a very stereotypical almost role within the house, that she was the one that was always sort of doing things, and in the kitchen there in particular, with creating food, making food, looking after her children in that way. From the knives that lay in wait, quite an ominous tone there, so harm maybe that potentially that we cause as adults, maybe a link there to the neglect that her son feels that he inflicted on her as he was older, and maybe wasn't there for her as much as he should have been. So it's quite an ominous line though. In bowls of washing up that was always raw, the knuckles red and rough from scrubbing hard. So again we've got this continuous list, this asyndetic listing, the routine maybe of raising children, the routine of her life, that monotony, the constantly having something she had to be doing, and again sort of the alliteration here, sort of highlighting the hard work. At saucepan, frying pan, cup and plate. So again that very stereotypical link of the woman providing sort of food and being in the kitchen, and giving love the only way she knew. So we've got here this idea of her love went into to what she did. This is how she kind of showed love. Her love went into the cooking. So it was her way of caring and looking after her family, providing for them in that way. In the cheap cuts of meat in roasts and stew. So this kind of highlights for us that their social class, particularly a working class, they're looking for maybe, this adjective cheap, suggesting that, that financially things were quite tight. So maybe there's a link there, this idea of a working class family. Old-fashioned food she cooked and we ate. So it's quite a sort of archaic link back there, this idea of roasts and stew and the cheap cuts of meat all creates this very kind of old-fashioned idea, and again maybe linking back to this working class upbringing of the poet. And I saw that they had taken off her rings. So here we have again a little bit of ambiguity. I saw they had taken off her rings. So who are they? We start to have some questions here. Who are they? And the significance again being drawn to her hands. The rings on her hands are obviously important, and they are repeated here. The rings she'd kept once in her dressing table drawer, so they're obviously significant. They were precious to her. They've been kept safe in a safe spot with other valuable items that are not necessarily, which is what it's interesting here, not necessarily valuable in terms of money, but actually precious in terms of having sentimental value. Things she'd kept: snapshots, long forgotten things, scent sprays, tortoise shell combs. And there's almost, when it talks about the scent sprays, we have this sibilance, but also there is this olfactory link. So olfactory meaning linking to the sort of taste and mouth, and actually those olfactory senses can have very powerful links to memory as well. So scent sprays are significant there as well. I'm sure we all have a particular scent that we would associate with a certain person that's important to us. You think of maybe a mum or a grandmother, that they have particular perfume that they wear. Even our friends, we can think of when we smell a certain smell, we think of them because that's maybe a perfume that they wear. So scent sprays, tortoiseshell combs, a snap or two from the time we took a holiday abroad. So these items, as I said, they're not necessarily valuable in monetary means, but they're certainly kind of valuable to her, and those are the things that she values. From the time we took a holiday abroad, interesting use here of we've got the parenthesis, the additional information that's been added in, and we've got the quotation marks being used here, abroad. Now, this again could suggest the kind of otherness of this, that maybe, you know, it was a very special occasion that they went abroad. Also, though, it could suggest abroad being used ironically to mean that it's still within the UK, but it's just away from their sort of their actual home. You know, maybe to the seaside somewhere that they went, still within the UK on a holiday abroad, so it could be used ironically. But lately had never been without, as if she wanted everyone to know she was his wife. So we have a sort of link to grief here. There's a sense that the poet's dad has maybe already passed away, because there's very much a sense that this poem is written from his perspective, that it's a very personal experience that he is sharing here. She wanted everyone to know she was his wife. So there's a sort of stronger link to the father there after death, that her grief is being portrayed through her wish to wear her wedding rings, maybe the rings that he's bought for her. Only now that he was dead. Very blunt there, that sort of, it's very declarative in the way it ends there. And we've got the caesura, so there's emphasis on that finality as well of the death of the father. And it's almost described with a lack of sensitivity here. Is it maybe that the poet himself has accepted the death, but it sort of contrasts, then it juxtaposes with the fact that the mother hasn't, and that's revealed through that caesura, and obviously through that description and the way that he's been very blunt with describing that the father is dead, relating that information is quite blunt. And it's interesting that that's the first full stop that we have. So we've got maybe this shift now. And her watch, so we're querying. And it's almost like at this point, because we have this caesura, it slows the pace of the poem. And for me, there's a sense that almost the emotion, thinking so much about his mother and, you know, the memories that she held, the scent bottles, it's almost like he needs to pause himself to collect himself, because emotionally it's becoming too much. So that caesura maybe is reflecting that need to pause and reflect. And her watch, and we again have this hyphen, so again it pauses, it slows down, and it becomes here the description. It's almost like a sales pitch. It's quite, again, detached now from the emotion that we might be felt through the description of his mother, and that love that she gave through her cooking and the way that she would behave there. So classic ladies model, so you know that adjective classic, it is suggesting almost like a sales pitch, gold strap, and gold there, that suggesting maybe the value of it. So this was maybe an expensive item, something that actually, if they were working class, would be very significant to the mother, because it is maybe a valuable asset that she has, because it did cost a lot more money than her other possessions. Again, we have this hyphen, so it's going back now into maybe more emotive language, predictably, and then as we look at it, that is confirmed. That is what we find. It was gone, and I'd never known her not to have that on. So there's italicized there as well, is significant because there's an emphasis. So you know, that was a valuable item that she always had on her, and maybe it's again showing how unusual it is, and him now seeing her without it, it strikes him as so unusual, because he would usually see her with that on. Not in all the years they sat together. So yeah, that sort of, there's an interval of time there where it talks about all those the years. It suggests how long the relationship between his mother and his father had been, and there is again that sense of grief. They'd been together for a very long time, and we find out, we discover in the next few lines, that the mother didn't cope very well with his loss, with his death. Watching soaps and game shows I disdain. So you know, this was something that his parents did together, and soaps and game shows. When he says I disdain, there's almost a confessional feel to this here, a snobbery about the fact that, you know, he would look at these kind of game shows and soaps with disdain, and maybe there's that different attitude is being revealed here, a different attitude because of maybe generational gap. It could even potentially be because of a class difference. Maybe he is more educated. He's then maybe confessing this guilt and his love for his parents, but actually, you know, he very much kind of drifted apart from them because of maybe that generational gap, or maybe because of a class difference, because he found himself kind of progressing up the social class, the social ladder, and he felt that difference between him and his parents. And not when my turn came to cook for her. So there's almost a role reversal here. It's almost like returning back to the mother's love at the beginning. Cooking was obviously significant to her. It was how she expressed love for her children, and that now has been flipped around, and it's him expressing his love for her by caring for her in that same way that she cared for him. And we have these items then, so chops or chicken portions, English and bland, that description there, that adjective bland, familiar flavours. So again, we've got alliteration here, emphasising, drawing attention to it. And there's almost a flow to it here. Familiar flavours. She said she preferred, again, alliteration to whatever funny foreign stuff. So there's almost a humour added here, humorous tone added. And there's very much a feeling of recalling his mother throughout this poem as she was when she was alive. So there's an edge of humour to it as well. So I just want to make sure I've got my notes here. And that continues here actually when she says young people seem to eat these days. So it's humorous that he's probably a middle-aged man at this point, but his mother is still referring to him as young, and like I said, emphasising that humorous attitude there she'd heard. And not all the weeks I didn't come. So that again, there's this confessional, another guilty confession, and these are kind of peppered into the response, into the poem. There's not as much emphasis on these, maybe because he does feel so guilty. He throws them in every now and then, but he doesn't want to dwell on them because they make him feel so awful. When she sat night after night and stared, unseeing, at the television, at her inner weather. There's interesting sentence structures here. You can see the way I've kind of grouped them together. Night after night, drink after drink, and then we have blinked and poured, gulped instead. There is almost this monotony, but maybe showing now the emptiness of the mother's life, whereas before her life was filled with caring for her family, looking after her children, looking after her husband, and now there's an emptiness to it. So we have this sort of parallelism in the structure. So the structure of these parts of the sentences are reflective. That's how they are similar in the way they've been constructed. So night after night, and stared unseeing. So there's, you know, really that emptiness, that feeling of emptiness with the mother. The television at her inner weather. So there's very much now sort of under the surface, there's something else going on. Maybe her behaviour is quite changeable as well, that idea of what's happening within her. Maybe there's some dark imagery being created there, this idea of the weather being unpredictable, maybe her moods, her feelings, her reactions to obviously what she's gone through, losing her husband, maybe her children, that idea of them moving up and moving away. But then heaved herself upright, blinked and poured. You know, we really do get an insight into this sort of grieving woman yearning for her husband again, and there is almost a dry humour in the way that this is being described, and that sort of rhythmic quality there being reflected with that dry humour. Heaved herself up, blinked and poured, drink after drink, and gulped and stared. The Scotch, but when he was alive she wouldn't touch. That was her way to be with him again. That's a very sad line. That again, that very much her yearning for her husband. That was her way to be with him again. You know, it's how she feels she can be close to him, or you know, there's her way of maybe drowning out her emotions. Her grief is through the drink, and maybe a way to forget that he's died, and feel a sense that he's still there. But it's very, very, very emotive. Very sad. not later in the psychiatric ward. So we have then this idea of the mental processes of the elderly. There's hints of the mental illness then by mentioning this psychiatric ward. Maybe a hint that his mother was suffering with a mental illness towards the end of her life, and that's obviously where she ended up before she passed. When she blinked unseeing at the wall, there's that link back to how she was behaving in her home. So contrasting this with the nurses giving the items back here, that actually she says that the nurses would steal anything, and there's antithesis there. Again, as I said, that this unseeing, this repetition, it's that idea that she's lost without her role. She's no longer a wife, she's no longer a mother, and she's lost because of that. And it links almost quite well with some of the themes we've looked at in terms of identity as well, that she's lost herself now without these roles to kind of preoccupy her. And dreamt of when she was a young girl, or the time before I was born. And here we have maybe this idea of mental health, that maybe she's forgetting things, and maybe some hints there at what the illness might be. I mean, is it potentially dementia? Is she kind of losing her memory and maybe regressing to when she was younger? When I was born or grew up and learned contempt. So again, there's almost that confessional kind of interjection there. So contempt and disdain, maybe his views as he's become older, his views on that older generation, then as he's sort of felt that difference between them, how different they are from his mother's generation, his parents' generation, his father's generation. While the TV in the corner bled. So interesting that obviously the TV is so much the centre sometimes of a home. It's where families kind of come together and sit together. And in this poem, there's a sense that the TV was that when his parents were sitting down together to watch TV shows and soap operas. But actually then, when his father died, the TV was there maybe more as a comforting thing for the mother, a background noise, because she was actually more preoccupied with her inner weather. And here the TV is on, but again it's neglected, it's there blaring out to drown out some poor soul's moans. So we really get this sense of, you know, the views of the others in this psychiatric ward and how they are sort of behaving. Poor soul's moans and curses, and again we've got this parallelism, blinked and stared, drooled and swore. And she took her pills and blinked and stared as the others shuffled round and drooled and swore. So that antithesis maybe, it does, a juxtaposition rather, because it draws attention to the fact that his mother, although she's not behaving in that same way, she's not drooling and swearing, but she's blinking and staring. So there's a clear sort of link between the behaviour is not what we would stereotypically see as normal behaviour. So she clearly belongs there, but there's still a difference between the way that others are behaving and how she's behaving. And sort of this sad state as well. There's such a sort of feeling and sense of sadness that permeates this poem. But she lay here, a thick rubber band. So this kind of has replaced the watch, and there's juxtaposition between that. This worthless rubber band has replaced that gold, precious watch that she would always wear. With her name on it in smudged black ink was all she wore. So this smudged black ink, there's almost a carelessness, that sort of adjective being used to describe the ink. It shows that there's a neglect or a carelessness about that. And again, greatly contrast with the gold, precious gold watch that is described earlier. On the other hand, I held a blotched and crinkled hand. So again, cyclical in nature, coming back to the opening, that focus on the hand, the wrinkled hand, the scarred hand, that is described to begin with, and now it's blotched and crinkled. So again, emphasising the sort of hard work that his mother has gone through, maybe in raising him, whose fingers couldn't clasp mine anymore. So there's hints here. There's almost a reluctance to actually say that his mother has died, and he's obviously returned to view her body and spend some time with her body, but you know that he's almost reluctant to actually say it explicitly that she's died. There's almost maybe a denial to it. or falteringly wave or fumble. So, you know, these sort of, the adverb here and the verb kind of highlighting the vulnerability of the mother at my sleeve. And we have this hyphen, so emphasising here before we go on to the last words that she said were, and we've got them in italics here, quite poignant, please don't leave. There's, you know, that begging almost by adding that the sort of the please to that imperative. But this conjunction kind of emphasising the choice, that actually he did have a choice, but he chose to leave. Does he feel maybe regret? Is it confessional? Is there a guilt? Of course I left. Now I was back. So it's, again, ironic, I was back, because actually now that he's back, it's useless. He might be there, but she's not. She's died. She's gone. And it actually makes no difference. He's not there when she actually wanted him. Though she could not know that, or turn her face to see. You know, sort of sums up here his regret of the title then as well. The significance is revealed. A nurse bring the little bag of her effects to me. And again, that the adjective little bag, you know, that's all that's left of her. And the significance is now that those effects, they are her belongings that are being passed back to him now that she's died, for him to keep. And we have this sort of rhyming couplet at the end as well. It really sort of emphasises and highlights the importance, the significance of these two lines. And like I said, that idea that, you know, now that she's died, his presence is as I said, useless, is redundant, and he wasn't there when she did actually need him or want him. And there's an element of that feeling throughout, that he feels that maybe he did neglect her, that he wasn't there when he should have been, and we see that in those little interjections that I've sort of drawn our attention to. Alright, so just to make some kind of general points here as well, in terms of the single stanza structure, it almost does feel like it's almost like he is kind of trying to unburden himself. He feels that there's almost like this emotional outpouring, and we see that very much in the fact that this is literally, I think, 3 sentences that construct this whole poem. So again, it very much feels like a very almost, I want to say organic, but it's very much him freely expressing how he feels. It's very almost reflective of a conversation or a narrative, rather than actually a constructed poem in that sense. And it's very kind of raw in his descriptions there of some of the imagery that he creates. So we also then as well have the cyclical structure, the fact that it comes back to the title of the poem with the effects, and we piece together then, because it is ambiguous, because he never clearly explicitly explains that he is reflecting on his mother, thinking about his mother, because she's actually died, and he has come to the hospital to, as I said, view the body, sit with his mother, and collect her effects, her items. So that is the significance there. Going on to the themes then, as we usually do, there are a couple of key themes that are covered in this poem. Obviously family, significant one that we've looked at before, and how he feels this idea then that he felt he should have been there maybe more for his mother. The idea that he feels maybe guilty in the way that he treated his mother. And obviously there's the idea of how his mother was treated her family as well, and how she expressed her love and her care for her family. Memory, so a common theme here as well. He reflects on his mother, he thinks about his mother, and you know, the little almost idiosyncratic aspects of a person, those little things, those little habits that people have, that make them special or unique to us, the things that we remember about them, those little things, the fact that she always wore that gold watch, the fact that, you know, she watched her and his father used to watch the game shows and the soap operas. Illness then, so towards the end of the poem we hear about the psychiatric ward, and that's reflected upon, and he sort of talks about how his mother was maybe regressing slightly there, maybe hinting towards something of maybe a more long-term illness that she was dealing with. And then loss, obviously, as I said, there is very much an overarching sadness that permeates the whole of this poem. Even when he is talking about the positive memories that he has of his mother, there is that sort of feeling and sense of loss that sort of overshadows almost the whole poem for us. As always, I have included that bibliography, so some of the things that some of the websites that I have looked at to almost reinforce what I thought and my initial sort of critical perspective on the poem. And again, I would encourage you to have a little look then as well at others. As always, if you have any questions, please do message me, email me, or through our Google Classrooms, just drop me a little message on there.